We're just reaching the top of the hour, so I'd like to introduce everyone to our webinar, which is Best Practices for Voice, Email and Chat. I think is an issue, and lots of people are trying to get their heads around today. We've got a nice agenda for you. I'll be handling all of the introductions and the interaction, and delighted to be joined by Martin Hill-Wilson from Brain Food, who's been a popular speaker on our webinars, and equally popular sort of double act with Tim Pickard from New Voice Media. Welcome to you. Thank you.
Which is Eric and which is Ernie? That's the question. We need to have answers.
We do. Between us.
As ever, we're going to make it as highly interactive as we can. Lots of top tips, lots of questions from the audience. We've already got quite an active discussion happening within the chat room. And just a reminder, it's callcenterhelper.com/chat. Just put in your first name, your last name, and your email. There is a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip, and I'll be asking Martin or Wilson afterwards to pick the winning tip from today's webinar.
Yes, bung me a fiver and I'm correct. So.
If you want a copy of the slides, and Martin always produces a completely different set of slides for every presentation I've ever seen him do, which is delightful, is this link, download webinar slides from there. So what I'd like to kick off today with is I'd like to kick off with a poll, and that poll is, which digital channels do you operate today? So just put that. Do you operate email, web chat, video, social media, letters, or is it regular mail? So just select all of those that apply to you. It'd be quite interesting to see how much video is coming.
Yeah.
So I think 18 months ago, video was I think I did a survey. I found about 5 contact centres out of about 5,000 in the UK using it. So it'd be interesting to see the numbers on that.
We'll let it pass now, but I have to make comment about the use of the word digital there, because it's extremely amusing to suddenly have letters, which are probably the most ancient form of communication, suddenly being badged as digital. So it's an interesting issue about how do we talk about digital, and at the moment there's a fashion for saying it's a text-based medium, and some are in and out. But actually,
I thought of using text-based. The problem with text-based is people think of text messages.
Right.
It's just text-based. So I use digital.
It's difficult.
Which is, from a purist perspective, is not right.
Because, the funny thing is, if you get to the technology, which Tim will say, is voice is probably the most digital channel because it's going over VoIP and SIP these days.
Yeah.
So it qualifies in that sense.
Indeed it does.
Okay. So which channels do you operate today?
Wow, look at this.
So what we've got, 100% of the audience using email,
Yep.
65 using web chat, 6% video, which is growing quite well.
That's growing, yeah.
63% social media, and almost overtaking social media, letters or regular mail as
that's interesting.
Postal services, perhaps as you would describe. So that's quite interesting. Okay, so that's what we're using today. What I'd like now to do is I'd just like to drill down, and I'd like to ask a question in the chat room, which is, in 10 years' time, that would be 2025. That's scary.
Yeah, it is a bit scary.
I don't know that.
Which channel do you think will dominate? Is it going to be voice? Is it going to be email, web chat, video, social media, or would it still be, or will it be letters or regular mail?
Or none.
Or none of the above, because we haven't put WhatsApp in. So it's a free form.
Or it could be everything.
So in the chat room, which is callcenterhelper.com/chat, could you put in what your prediction is likely to be? Eric says it's voice. Michael says social media. Vanessa says probably web chat or something similar. Alison says social. Ryan says social media. David, social. Connor says it's video. Joan says it's social.
Lots of votes for social.
Alison says social media mixed with email. Eric says at the end of the day, voice takes the least customer effort. Interesting. So customers will always revert to it.
Yeah.
Sebastian says voice or web chat. Elaine, web chat or social. Video or social says Rob. Chat says Robin. Zoe says social media. Harsh says a combination of web chat and voice. Tessa says social. Mark says web chat. Reginald says video and social. Michael says it could be something entirely new. So it's interesting. We've got a whole audience full of experts. We've currently got over 100 people on the call, but there's no one consensus about the view of the future. I guess no one's been up on the mountain and got the carved block of the 10 commandments for the future.
Well, I'm interested in how strong people think social is going to come through. That's an interesting thing. But it's
very strong.
There's two elements there. One is basically, I mean, there's another discussion, by the way. I think there's got to be some integration of the text stuff soon. If you think about it, text is text is text. Now, it's either going over the internet or it's going over the telco networks, and there's different formats of that. But at the end of the day, we're just using text. And yet there's a huge variety that is going on. So maybe life is going to get consolidated down to a much more simple thing. You know, that's the way that we do it. I don't know. And then you've got the voice element in for the reasons of simplicity and effort and all those kinds of things. Interesting.
Well, it's also interesting that a number of people think that voice is still an important ingredient in this whole process, and I would tend to agree with that. I think it is probably the easiest for us humans to cope with, but also there's the whole immediacy of voice, and if it's complex, then voice can often be the best medium. So I think voice will always have its place in the 2025 world.
I think the rule of thumb is for emotional and complex, voice is always going to win out. And in that sense, I would say voice and video, actually, because I think either video chat and or voice is the next closest to in-person, which is the best form of communication because you've got the feedback loop from body language and everything. But the most affordable versions are then voice and video chat. So I think video chat, we're too early in our experience of knowing how that works. Didn't we have ages ago, a couple of years ago, we had the gentleman who's deputy Stuart, isn't it, from Shoe?
Shoe, yes.
Yeah, and he said that he was already using video chat to sell and getting an uplift as a result of that. So I still think a lot of people are yet to tweak that. But anyway, interesting stuff.
So we're going to pass the baton across to Martin Hill-Wilson and to Tim Pickard, who are going to be doing a double act on latest trends in multi-channel and best practices, voice, email, and chat. So Martin, if you'd like to share your thoughts.
Good. So this first section, everybody, is really just a scene setter, I suppose, in terms of what we see as happening in multi-channel. And again, there's a ton of material on this, so it's just a taster to, again, get you to think about some of these pretty rapid changes that are going down. I suppose the main point, behaviorally, from customers' perspective, is to say that choice of channel really depends on a huge number of variables. It could be how much time we've got, what we want to be doing, the context we find ourselves in, the situation we find ourselves in. It's a private discussion. Do we really want to be talking? The availability of the device. Oh, I'm on Dartmoor. There's no broadband. There's a whole number of reasons that will drive us, and there is a degree of generational.
There's a generational issue as well.
Propensity sitting in there. Now, most of us have not got a feedback loop through voice of the customer and deep segmentation that allows us to sort of say, in the CRM, I know exactly what communication preferences all the individual customers have. So at the end of the day, faced with this set of variables, probably the main thing that we should come from at the moment is to say, we need to deliver choice of channel. Yeah, and we don't know precisely how our customers are going to use it, but probably where they're going to be using a number of different channels, even within the same customer journey. And therefore, the fluency of that and the ease with which that happens, our ability to see the combined history in CRM, a single version of the truth in terms of service knowledge, all of these things, absolutely.
Well, I think that's a very important point, being able to tie those channels together and being able to reference the single customer across those channels is really key. And having the ability to do that from a technology point of view obviously is really important to being able to service all of those different channels and have that single view of the customer. It's kind of an imperative.
And I think why that's worth mentioning now is that that's easy to state in a webinar, strategically speaking.
Very easy to say.
We've already heard evidence today that indeed a number of us are still running separate teams and queues. And in reality, we all know that the call centre has been difficult to justify in terms of investment. So we've all had to settle for, oh, for God's sake, just give me chat, just give me email, all of which has led to point solutions.
Right.
And so in reality, whilst most of us will agree with this, it's hugely topical still, because we need to find more effective, cheaper ways in which we can tie all this stuff together.
Absolutely. I mean, we are talking to customers all the time about the channels that they are using, and the instance of people being able to tie these things together and use multi-channel is very small. Actually,
not many references.
Growing number, but relatively small number of working in implementations today.
So the sunny side up is if you get to that position, you are able to be differentiated at this point in the game.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. Lots of points of differentiation around that.
So looking at now the customer side of the discussion, and indeed we've already got some evidence from people sharing earlier on about what they're providing. There's a match here, which is nice. So this is a pretty recent piece of research, UK-based. It was done from an online survey of about 1,000 UK consumers. And it's basically saying when you're engaging with customer service, what are the most popular channels? So again, we see email, we see phone, we see chat. We also see online support, fast coming through really pretty strongly. And notice the bottom one there, which we'll see on the next slide, in fact, search being a strong point as well, and I'll come back to that in a second.
But the interesting point on this slide, I think, is the bit below the header, which says the survey also shows that customer service interactions now begin online, with 75% of those starting on a laptop.
Yes.
So so the next one is that's really important, and I think it's really important from this whole kind of outside-in concept. So looking at your customer journey from the customer's perspective rather than your perspective. So
it doesn't start with a phone call.
It doesn't start with a phone call. Do we track that the first call is, or contact, I should say, the first contact is actually online, failed. Second is a call, which I'm calling a first call, but my customer's calling a second call or contact. Right. So there's a big difference between your customer's perspective on this and how you might be viewing this and counting it and looking at your metrics internally. So I just think it's an interesting point. I think a lot of organisations still look at first contact as
agreed.
The
now,
call.
To that end, here's definitely a takeaway point for everybody. Have you noticed how Google is beginning now to report when you Google a name of a company? Yeah. So I need to talk to X. What they'll come back with now is not just the website URL, or even the divisions of the website, which you typically have. You'll also have contact details. And I'm beginning to also see the customer service number. Now, I don't know what the SEO has been around of that to have got that highlighted. I can remember having a whole discussion about this being an opportunity, and clearly it's beginning to work its way through. But as a takeaway, go and find out from Google what does it take to get our telephone number, possibly, the availability of the web chat service, the handle for the Twitter customer service thing, all of that listed proactively right at the top of the page, because if 60% of our customers are starting there, it reduces the effort by giving them choice right up front. Now, it's an emerging thing. I don't know quite how it's happening. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but it strikes me as being an important opportunity.
Yeah, indeed.
Right. Next question, which again is happy for the title of our seminar today, which is, when engaging with a brand, what's the most popular thing? And I guess the takeaway here is it's split. It's a third, a third, a third.
Yeah.
Which comes back to the point of trying to second guess which is best is a nonsense. It's saying we need to provide, at this point in time, on average, a competency across those three media.
And I guess it also depends on, both preference but circumstance.
Indeed.
If I'm broken down inside of the motorway, I won't be thinking I'll send an email and that will happily go into a ticketing system. That may be the quickest way to do it.
Well, to that extent, you're probably not even going to do chat. You're probably going to whack social out there and say help.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
So that's interesting. Now, given all of that, how are we doing? And unfortunately, as ever, the consumer is racing ahead relative to our competency as organisations to respond. And there's a great piece of work that Eptica do on an annual basis here in the UK by doing a mystery shop exercise, and they ask 100 of the top brands in the UK a number of questions which customers would ask. The simple stuff. How do I do this? Where do I find that? What's the answer to? All those kinds of things. And they come up with all sorts of interesting things, like, for example, in many cases, unfortunately, the consistency of answer isn't there. So if you can see in the 2015 critique, consistency is lacking. What they're evidencing there is the fact that if I asked you opening times of your retail stores, and I asked you that by voice, email, SMS, social, and web chat, you're possibly up for 5 different answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which again speaks to the fact that we have got people in silos, we haven't got any common denominator, and we're not planning or thinking about the outside-in journey experience. We're thinking about our inside perspective, which is not so good. So speed is improving, but accuracy still remains bad. And now, again, accuracy in their language is all to do with whether or not they responded, or indeed what they said was valuable, was correct at the end of the day. So our ability to provide knowledge to an increasingly diverse set of communication channels has not been thought through in a holistic way.
Yeah.
And I know certain industries are really deeply entrenched by giving even cost centers across those channels, which to me is bonkers.
Yeah.
You know, if I've got a pot of money just to look after email, I'm just going to think email.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I don't care about the rest of the journey at all, because that's my responsibility.
Well, you're going to be measured on how are you responding to email.
Indeed.
And you know, the result will be self-fulfilling, really, at that point.
So big obvious point here, where's the strategy, where's the joined up thinking around all these kind of bits and pieces? And further evidence that we are struggling to keep pace is with again a long-standing annual survey done by the Institute of Customer Service. And interesting there is the pattern that sort of from 2009 up to 2013, we were getting better and better and better, and then we had a slide, and now we're sort of flatlining and trying to sort of read the tea leaves on that. And I know some of the commentary. The general consensus is that we don't really seem to be managing to keep pace with what is obviously now an accelerated set of expectations.
Yeah.
We know that there's a ton going on at brands. You know, we're not asleep in customer service. There's a ton of investment going on, but clearly that is not translating quick enough into competencies that the customer's beginning to notice.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, CEB Corporate Executive Board have a very interesting paper on this, which we can publish after this. We can give it to you, John, too. Which talks about the live customer experience being split into 2 parts.
Okay.
So there's the live interaction where we're emailing or chatting with or talking to the customer, and there's the pre-interaction factors. So this is previous contacts that I may have had with you, the outcome of those, the value that I perceive as a customer from you. The consistency of information that I'm getting from you. So all of those things go into creating an opinion, if you like, or a kind of a perception of your service interaction. And if you have those available at the point of the live service interaction, you are far more able to give a better quality service.
Yes.
So we talked about this before, the kind of the single version of the truth around the customer. Whatever the interaction, having that available, seeing what those interactions are beforehand, giving you some context, allows you to potentially provide a better level of service, and that will ramp that chart.
So that piece of research from CEB is saying if you don't have that contextual awareness, you're never going to hit decent levels of CSAT.
It's very hard. Well, they believe. And their numbers show that you're dealing with 47% of the problem in the live service interaction and 53% in the pre-interaction.
Really?
So if you don't have that, you can only ever get so good. You need both. You need both to get all the way up.
And that possibly is one of the ways of interpreting that chart.
Absolutely.
And do you know what's interesting? Contact centres, the only thing we've been able to easily affect is the quality of the people. Yeah. So that whole emphasis upon trying to get individuals in the team to do a great job, that only goes so far.
Right, exactly. You need the context and the tools to be able to get them to get further up the ramp. Yeah.
Okay. Talking of getting up the ramp, Connor has said in the chat room that if you want to get your phone number in customer service phone number, it's a service called Google My Business.
Thank you.
Google My Business, which is a free service. So I guess if you type Google My Business into Google,
you'll get a number.
You can put your own phone number into there.
Interesting they don't promote that.
Well, it may come through word of mouth.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for being on the ball there. Excellent. Good. Right, just to conclude this section then on multi-channel trends, I thought I would put a little bit of spookiness into the conversation and start to worry people.
This is the rise of Skynet.
It is the arnification of society, as I said earlier on. And it's coming through thick and fast. So if you were cooking up digital and you thought of it as a series of ingredients, what you might want to put into the blender is a little bit of natural language processing, which has got much better these days. You know, the latest generation IVR is actually quite easy to engage with because you can speak it as you want to speak it. Put a little bit of what they call machine to machine, and that's where the arnification comes. So actually it continues to learn off its own bat and get smarter as a result of more engagement, which is critical. And by the way, absolutely drives self-service satisfaction. Semantic search, you know, which is the smart stuff that we increasingly expect Google to deliver back to us, and a little sprinkling of pixie dust around of AI, and you have the basic recipe for smart automation. And that really sits under the bigger banner of proactive, which again is a theme that we've been discussing for a long time. You know, if they need to talk to us, can we not anticipate, can we not eliminate, can we not reduce effort? And if you look at that as a technical problem, then those are the ingredients that start to drive forward. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that, again, we are behind the curve as businesses in terms of the tech. We're beginning to see this tech turn up first and foremost for the benefit of us as consumers. So what you're seeing in front of you are four icons that represent some of the major players in using this tech in a voice context. So if you happen to be Apple or you happen to be Android, you know, or even Microsoft, you're probably listening to Siri, Cortana, Google Now, or the Amazon version is Alexa. Now, all of these are voice interfaces to something which is increasingly smart, and they are becoming what we will increasingly recognize as personal assistants. So the little story I was told, which we tried out earlier on today, actually, was with Siri and the latest download of IO9, which has apparently brought Siri back up to parity with Cortana, is that I can say to Siri in the morning, oh, can you remind me, please, Siri, to pick up some milk tonight? It will register that as a to-do list item, which will then be pinged back. In fact, it worked on the...
It did, it worked, yeah. So I will be picking up milk this evening at 6:30, that's right.
I think you had a previous version of that, and then what it would also do is to know from other information it can find out about you, where you work from, use its own maps, and therefore suggest the local shop from which you can then buy that milk. So again, we're beginning to see this stuff starting to genuinely make our life a little easier, and you can just see how we're going to become increasingly more reliant. Now, the reason for painting that picture is, let's imagine us 2 or 3 years down the line. Most of us have got an increasing, you know, comfort with using this stuff and an expectation that we can have our lives helped through that way of interfacing. Hence, as customer service operations, what's the equivalent? And the equivalent in a self-service context sits in that left-hand box there called virtual assistants. They can get called different things, intelligent advisors or whatever you want, but they are part of the overall mix that you should be thinking about in terms of making people consume a self-service option as opposed to always needing to talk live. And of all of that, I just picked out the choicest example of one of these. It's not the only one in town at all. This particular version is called Amelia, and it's quite deliberately meant to be hyper-real in terms of the imagining of that interface. You know, she just doesn't do bad blinking. She looks really quite intelligent. When she speaks at you, there is a very high degree of lip sync and all of that. And, you know, they're getting close to the kind of animation that we expect out of the big animation studios. But, and this is the big but in terms of how she behaves with you, the capability is listed here. So just to read it through so everyone gets this. Amelia is modeled on the human brain. For this reason, she becomes smarter with time. Her thought process can be explained in a sequence of steps. First, she understands your question. She responds to the inquiry. She knows the answer to the question. She executes the process to solve the issue. And this is the clever bit. If she does not know the answer to the question, she can find it by searching the web or your intranet or any other source, presumably. And the killer, which is where the Skynet bit comes in, if she cannot find the answer, she escalates the question to a human colleague. She then observes her colleague's actions and absorbs the information for future reference. Which raises the question, what's the balance between live and these facilities, creatures, support, resource in the future. And if we go to our 2020 perspective, again, there isn't any more just live and self-service. You've got a very much more blended environment. And in fact, some of the other use cases, which are much more interesting, is things like booking high-end hotel reservations where the experience absolutely must be impeccable. It's not either one of these or live, it's both in many instances, and the handover is seamless. That's where it starts to get really interesting. And in fact, already these kind of capabilities are diminishing live chat because you can actually deliver that intelligently in a way. And just to take the voice component of that, voice 20 years ago when I was in SI, probably out of the box was 60% accurate. That's far too low for us to feel comfortable, which is why that generation of IVR did not work. 20 years worth of refining those language models, it comes 95% accurate out of the box. That's the level at which a human being thinks it's, quote, real. So the illusion works already. That's before customizing to a particular organization. So we're very close to that line. And again, some of us would have heard people like Gates, is it Elon Musk, you know, the guy that, or that guy, even Mr. Hawkins has said, we've peered into the AI labs in Silicon Valley and we're shaken and stirred in terms of what we're seeing. In other words, it's all turning up a little bit too quick. So it's an interesting point that if we're talking about multi-channel, there's a whole new revolution just on the cusp that none of us are yet talking about, but will profoundly affect the amount of self-serve and indeed the value of using live people in a not too distant future. There you go. So that's the end of that, which is something to think about. Now, in return to that, then you've got these comments, which are again terribly important. Angela, who was doing all that great work at Burberry, is now hanging out in Apple. She's been at last dragged up to the surface because somebody was writing on the New York Times. And one of the comments she made in her article is, I'm increasingly aware of the fact that we've got to go back to the basics and make sure we don't lose the human touch. You know, as we increasingly get smart, it shouldn't be driving us away. It's got to help us to engage. And of course, that's what Apple understands absolutely well, and she understood at Burberry. But it's something we must remember, because if we just try to automate everything, we could lose it entirely. Anyway, there's that conversation. So, by the way, any responses to that in the chat room, we'll pick that up later on. But how did that grab you? Can you relate to that? What implications do you see in terms of resource planning? All sorts of bits and pieces.
So if you'd like to type those comments into the chat room, which is callcenterhelper.com/chat, we'll be going to in about 5 minutes to look at the answers. Okay,
next section, channels and sessions. Great piece of work. I think both of you actually did top of the year, wasn't it? How many was it, John T?
Over 600 call center managers were consulted, and customer service directors were consulted for this research. So a great big sample size.
Good sample. So the question was, what initiatives do you currently have in the contact center? And right at the top of the list is multi-skilling, which is great. So, you know, in the context of our discussion today, clearly that can be used as a way to spread the load and be smarter around managing channels, at least providing the tech's not getting in the way. So that can be used for things like career progression. Obviously, it's a way to keep people involved, gives you a degree of operational flexibility. The customer experience absolutely demands that. I mean, there's many instances where I start social, I want to continue and chat, but I'd like to continue that with the same advisor. I don't want to flip off. You know, I start with email, I'd like it to again be picked up by the same person. And again, I think you were saying earlier on, actually, a well-known brand, which we will not mention on air today, used to do a super job about keeping the same person throughout the whole task, and has now decided that's not a very efficient way of doing things, and has diminished the experience as a result of that. So, again, interesting. And then cost to serve. Again, there's obviously implications as far as that's concerned. So, in terms of, you know, how many channels can people use and all the rest of the stuff, there's an interesting dilemma in that. And I'd like to ask a number of questions of our audience to see how that's developing. The first one is, I've noticed something, which is that we're beginning to talk about digital teams, which often will include chat and social together. Is that emerging? Have you all got that in a single group, or have we still got people who are in chat groups and essentially in separate ones? So there's the question, are chat and social handled by the same team or separate teams? We'd love to hear your answer to that.
So we've got the poll going up. Are they handled by the same team, web chat and social, separate teams, or do you not do both?
Indeed.
So we've got the results from the audience here.
Very well.
Sample size of 117.
Ooh,
20% are the same team. 52% separate teams, and 28% don't do both.
Now I go purely guess, but I bet you over time that will probably see more of the same team.
Yes, I would have thought so.
And the separate bit will decline.
Yeah, I mean, I got the sense that was going to be the answer from the commentary you were getting earlier on the call, that they were going to be separate teams.
Yeah. I mean, I said when I go on website, when I go on site, I see increasingly those two brought together as a new sort of age team. So that's one question. Thank you very much for that. That's really good. And then the second thing that we want to know is this old chestnut about the way that chat has been ROI'd, basically, which is often to say it's cheaper, it's better than what you've got because you can run more than one session. And whilst we're going through this, how many are you actually doing?
Yeah.
I just want to make the point that if it's simple, you can probably multitask, but I don't think you can any more listen to a complicated customer problem on chat than you can on voice or face-to-face. I think you've still got the same dilemma of listening if you want.
Yeah.
And so there's an interesting question here, which is how many can you actually, from the efficiency point of view, do versus customers beginning to go, you're not hearing me, there's too much delay, I bet you're just talking to 5 people at the same time, and starting to diminish the
it will diminish the customer experience over time. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What's the current fashion?
So let's have a look at the results.
I'm going to go with 1. Oh no, 2. Yeah.
2. I think that's quite safe. Oh, actually, 40% still being 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 3 was, if you like, the conventional wisdom, if you like.
It was actually, wasn't it? Yeah.
With 1 being, sort of what a lot of people are doing. But it looks like people may have been trying 3 and find out it's not actually delivering a top-notch customer experience.
Yeah.
And maybe it's 2.
Yeah.
There is an element of people start a chat and then go off and make a cup of tea.
Sure.
Come back and expect to come back. So
I think there are particular instances as well where one is essential. So where there are particularly sensitive conversations, those types of things. We have people who do charity work, those types of things. It's 1.
That would be mad to try and multitask.
Yeah, absolutely. That, So there are instances where 1 is the only answer.
Well, the only other thing I would say is, outside of my personal opinion, is to maybe use the post-interaction survey technique of making sure that you're not trying to do too many of them. And if you're seeing a drop on that, then you maybe need to rein it back.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, Mike says it all depends on the type of chat. Technical resolution is harder to multitask than it is always lookup. And Alison interestingly says 3 is how many we currently deliver, but we do feel high quality is being compromised. So it's saying we might be looking to drop back to 2.
So combine those 2. I think that's it. It depends on the task, what you're trying to do.
Definitely.
If it's relatively brain-free, just literally cut and paste the same information, low level, I think you can do a number. If the type of customers are just... You see, I remember in the good old days, 10 years back, when it was being sold, it was a technical tool, right? So the key answer to the question, what's wrong with my PC, was reboot. Now, if you were rebooting Windows back in the day, it would be 10 minutes before it turned up. You could easily do it.
You could do quite a few in that time, couldn't you?
And that's where I'm sure the myth came from, in some degree, that actually it's a great medium for that. But of course, we've moved on.
And interestingly, Mike said we used to do 3, but have pulled back to 2.
Ah.
And Anissa said our advisors are giving us a lot of feedback that doing 3 at the same time is pretty intense.
Yeah.
Interesting. The old rule of thumb, not that old, but was that a web chat would take about twice as long as a phone call.
Yeah.
But that you could do 3 at the time, so there was a cost saving.
Right. But if it's only 2,
there you go.
There may be no difference in cost between putting people onto web chat than on to doing it over phone.
So if we go back to our
strategy, channel choice.
If we go to strategy, the reality is the cost of doing business in today's world is choice, not the fact that you can migrate it to a cheaper channel necessarily. So opportunities to reduce cost of serve have got to come from tackling demand failure rather than thinking there's such a thing as a cheaper channel necessarily.
Yeah.
Interesting. Fascinating stuff. Great stuff, guys. Thank you very much for that. So let's just have another section and get this just before we zip over. I think we're going to go into the chat room in a second. And that's talking about the delivery of consistent customer experience, which is, again, compounded. If you've got lots of channels, it can be much more difficult to do. And again, from my perspective of working with organizations, I am aware that what I'm about to share is happening in all sorts of different ways. The main point I'm making here, though, is that we've got to continue doing this work and really bringing it into business as usual. So this is the argument about not just running harder in contact centers, it's about getting smarter. And so the first thing I want to say is this. The consistency only improves if we understand what the problem is, to state the blindingly obvious. So what is your voice of the customer? And within that conversation, think about voice of the customer as being rather similar to the way that GPS works on your smartphone. In other words, it triangulates more than one satellite to give you a reading of your position. So do not rely upon just post-call survey. That will give you one point of reference. Compare that to what your advisors are saying. Compare that to interaction analytics. Compare that to mystery shopping. Whatever, build a rich source from which you can trust what the voice is. Anyway, then discover what does and does not work, and then also put in service improvement at the other end. My observation is that many of the larger organizations in the territory are doing these bits, but that activity is typically split across other teams in the business. Insight teams are often reporting up to a different person, CX maybe. Yeah. Often the insight is put into PowerPoint, reported on a monthly basis. It's not operationally live. It's not as useful as it could be. The service improvements often are big, strategic. We've got to rebuild CRM. We'll see you in 4 years. You know what I mean? It doesn't help us on a daily basis. So all I'm saying is that I think the contact center needs to wade into that conversation and decide what it needs in terms of immediacy and immediate value to improve. And it needs to be part and parcel. It might even have to put more money into the pot and extend its responsibilities, but clearly, if it can diminish demand failure, it's a net going to be making itself a more profitable business. So that's one side of it. The other side, which is very closely associated, is a business that's thinking about yourself in the bigger context of the journey that the customer's going on. And as Tim said very well earlier on, actually, it does not begin with a phone call, it does not begin with a web chat, it begins elsewhere. And again, because the digital profile of us as customers keeps changing over time, so does the way in which we engage with you as a customer. And therefore those journeys are dynamic. Doesn't mean they change every week, but year on year they are going to evolve. So what effort are you putting into those journeys? And the one thing I would say is typically they are organized at enterprise level, so they have an enterprise perspective. Often the detail of what happens at the touch point within contact centers is not sufficient, number one, so you need a more detailed view of that. And secondly, they should really be not just academically sat on the wall, they should be used as a daily activity, possibly integrated into quality monitoring, planning a new customer service routine, a whole bunch of things that you can bring to bear on a daily basis, from again which you drive service improvement. So if you want better consistency of experience, these are the things that you either need to directly manage or be part of a very tight cross-functional team, which happens all the time in the background, and harvest that stuff rather than just trying to work harder at the front end. Okay, so that's all done. So having made those points, let's zip over and see what that's stimulated as far as the commentary in the chat room is concerned.
Okay, let's have a look at what's going on within the chat room, and some quite fascinating feedback coming up. So we've got. If you haven't already put any tips or questions in, use hashtag tip for a tip, hashtag question for a question, and there is a box of champagne or box of chocolates for the best tip or question. Mike says, anything in writing has the opportunity to end up on the internet and directly reflect on your company, because it's very recordable. Yep. Always put your best foot forward, which I think is
sound advice.
Eric's a bit worried about video chat, as an opinion. Video chat takes up a lot of bandwidth compared to voice, but I suppose in 2025 our ISP infrastructure would have improved a lot too. I guess video in a corporate environment works well if you're in a city centre with a very fast fibre connection. I guess if your contact centre is located on an industrial estate on the outskirts of town, it may not be quite so connected.
Yes, but in the bigger picture of things, just think about how rapidly Netflix has turned up out of nowhere.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think with things like WebRTC and those types of technologies, video becomes much more accessible to many people. So, I mean, I take the point, but I think he's also right in saying over time, that will, that will diminish. The barriers will diminish.
So Michael said that in their contact center they're doing evaluations on chat just like email. Pull up the chat log once everything's complete is a way of doing quality checking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Zoe says, I think it's quite difficult to sense how the customer feels when a chat has completed, and then therefore tend to mark the agent up or down depending on how you read it.
Great point, and that's why you're losing some of the bandwidth in human communication when you just move from down to text level.
Yeah.
It's more ambiguous, which actually is a huge hint in terms of what chat's suitable for or not.
Yeah.
But it might well mean, in terms of doing the quality monitoring work, you do need the outside-in perspective, and therefore that's where you particularly concentrate your post-interaction survey work to discover how the customer felt in that situation.
Yeah.
But it does actually, as a matter of interest, chat has historically scored highly on customer sat, interestingly.
Here's a question for Martin, which ties very nicely into the book you published last year on social customer service. Would you say social media, and in particular Twitter engagement, is still growing?
2 parts to that answer. Yes. It depends where you are in the world.
Is that the short or the long answer?
Yeah, it's a very short answer. You know that. It is growing, but not substantially.
Okay.
In the first instance, Twitter itself has woken up, which might be news to people. It is now very excited about being a customer service opportunity. It's done a number of things which you may or may not be aware of. You don't have to follow in order to be able to engage. You don't have a restriction any longer now on direct messaging. It's moved from 140 characters to 10,000. And by the way, if you can't answer the question there, you better pick the phone up. And interestingly, they have now released and made available, not to the client, but to vendors such as New Voice Media, their backlog of tweets as a data archive to mine. Now that then enables you to understand the relative degree of engagement and influence that a customer has, and that will now be an overlay that you can offer back to customers. So yes, there's definitely some movement through to make Twitter an easier way of using the channel. That's half my answer. The other half of the answer is, if you look to the growth of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, it's flatlining. Messaging over social platforms such as WeChat in the Far East, WhatsApp, thank you, and indeed Facebook Messenger are growing rapidly and are almost at parity point. And I suspect that the future trend is going to be that both brands, because they don't like to be seen in public anyway, and apparently customers are quite comfortable going back to a one-to-one rather than one-to-many form of communication.
Oh, okay.
So that's the other thing that's going on there. So is it still social? It's not social by my definition, but Facebook Messenger is going to tell you that you can actually log in at the end of having bought something on a website, and then it will continue in a customer service context to deliver you messages that you can say it hasn't turned up, can I swap, etc., etc. But that's really gone back to a form of email or live SMS as far as I'm concerned.
We've got Connor says, I love the idea of a virtual assistant as a deflection tool for low-value ad contacts, but high-value customers will still need a human touch.
Yeah.
And we've got a final question for this section, which is Adam says, I work for a technical contact center. At the moment, we have just phone and email support. I'm looking at trying to push a case forward towards chat. However, I'm not sure what routes to take up, set up, or issues. Does anyone have any advice for
the easy low-hanging fruit argument there is that chat is real-time, email is not. And the fact is, particularly with technical, where there's a lot of problem solving, you can have 2 or 3 goes at the ping pong before you've established the nature of the problem.
Yes.
That's not very good. Chat you deal with in a much more immediate way. And in that sense, chat eats email for breakfast in that context. And particularly, by the way, if you're then going to if you're prepared to offer a transcript as part of the service afterwards, you also don't lose the other benefit that email provides, which is evidence of what's been agreed.
Yeah. And I'm also guessing with Webchat, you also got some quite useful stuff that could form a basis for your knowledge base, because you have that problem resolution and actually some quite already good nuggets of text that are there, rather than email, which tends to be more perhaps the canned answers.
The only thing I would say is that chat, interestingly though, is really very closely associated with e-commerce.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, depending
that's
on the
the
complexity of the environment, whether chat is the most suitable tool, you may be able to identify issues, point them in the right direction, those types of things. But I think once you get into an in-depth conversation about a technical issue, you probably want to switch to a different channel.
Oh, yeah, and within the general area of text, the other interesting thing is this. Certainly to a first-generation chat, I don't know if they've changed it, but I remember reading this quite recently. It's not native to the operating systems on smartphones. And what that means is you can't, from a web chat context, reach into pictures.
No.
Now, let's take the insurance claim, where I'm just taking a picture then of the car, and I want to give that back to the advisor via web chat. Apparently, you can't do that. And that's one of the reasons why SMS is going through a bit of a resurgence, apparently arguing that you can. And by the way, that's an asynchronous channel, because if nobody's available on web chat, it doesn't appear. So that's possibly a consideration against chat. But relative to email, if it's slow in SLA terms and irritating to customers, chat is certainly a step up. Okay, yes, good. Right, there we go. Let's move on. So thank you very much for all of that. Let's talk about this problem of separate non-associated queues and what that does. I'm not going to get into the conversation about Father Christmas and, wouldn't it be nice if, but what I will say is that it's important to be educated about this. And since very little of this has in truth been sold over the last 25 years, I think it's still worth going over the basic principles. So when you are forming your Dear Father Christmas, what I would like really for,
what would I like for Christmas? It is only September still.
Yeah, this is what you're asking for. You are asking for what's called a single queue. And what that means is all forms of communication are put down that queue as an event. It doesn't matter whether it's text, it doesn't matter whether it's voice, actually, it can even be a back office task.
It can be a back, yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So your letters that we were referring to earlier on can be digitized and put into this queue as well. And they can be assigned to individuals, or in fact, you've got a learning task to do for your agents that can be put into the queue as well, so that they can be scheduled.
So think of it like as a very large motorway with a bunch of lanes, and you're dropping, the equivalent of the communication into each of the lanes. The question then about who gets to win and go forward is then driven by a set of things called the business rules.
Right. Exactly.
And the business rules are based upon the logic that you ought to be deriving between the balance of the need to be effective as a business and the needs of the customers in terms of things like SLAs and all the rest of it.
Right.
But really, at the end of it, so in the simplest of things, if you don't know a lot of stuff about the customer, which we'll come on to in a minute from CRM, what you do know is the simplest of stuff, which says, this is how long this person, not knowing anything else about them, has been waiting in this queue.
Yes.
And you may well say, we're about to breach what we consider to be an acceptable amount of time in this particular queue, therefore that particular thing will be accelerated.
Right.
Now, the key point is this: if you are running separate queues for email, chat, phone, you cannot cross-reference in real time where you are as far as that experience is concerned, and you have no flexibility.
Right.
In the most sophisticated systems that are employing this, there are already dynamic email, IVR messaging techniques that say, by the way, it's a busy time today. Although you might want to talk to us, it's a 10-minute wait. What you might want to do is to chat to us because there's less than 30 seconds. Would you like to do that?
Or, alternatively, it's a 10-minute wait. Would you like to reserve your place in the queue?
Even better.
Hang up, go away, and then when you come to the front of the queue, we will call you back.
We'll do that. Even better concierge service.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Or, alternatives. We know you've been dealing with Ron and you wanted to talk to Ron about your problem. He's not available.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk to the next available person? And similarly, you can cross. So we talked about individual groups saying, people do email and chat, people do voice, and we don't split them. Well, this gives you the opportunity. You can say, you know what, everybody on their phone's busy. We have somebody who is a 6 out of 10 on their voice interaction skills. Rather than go out of SLA, we're going to say we're going to use that person.
So classic, it enables sophisticated skill-based routing. Right?
Well, also it widens your pool because you then have the ability to be able to say, actually, I'm going to use a pool of skills, and at the margin they have skills to answer this. So I'm going to use that margin.
And we've already seen from the research that multi-skilling is way up for everybody.
Right.
So that works.
Right.
So in summary, a single queue allows you to manage in a much more elegant way, in real time, a variety of different forms of communication by doing two things. One, giving you access to a single set of business rules, which are unified. And I tell you, back in the day when you had to have different business rules for different channels, it was hell for queues. And secondly, even more importantly, is unified reporting. Don't forget on that. These are no longer now go and do a spreadsheet and go and build up, the knowledge of what's happened. So you get two huge benefits that take place. And I still have not seen a lot of people yet using the reporting side of this, I have to say, to produce intelligent decisions in terms of what's happening at queue level, the type of things and all the rest of it. That is the beginnings of a much more sophisticated way of being able to manage your contact center. So that's really what the queue thing is about. And once you've got that in place, what then happens when you plug in the knowledge that is sitting in basically your CRM? And the answer is it goes from black and white into multicolor.
So, we're talking about the ability to personalize the service, or indeed the routing within, because we know more about the individual. So within queue, we can say this individual on the left, we know that they are a VIP, so we might want to answer that call ahead of other calls. So we're not just taking calls as they come in, but we're actually prioritizing some of those.
Yes.
We in this instance, we know they have an open case. That their renewal is due within a certain time period. So these are all things about this is an important one. They're a French speaker, and it's an email.
Yes.
So our first choice would be to match all of those tickets, if you like, with the skills of the agent. So this is kind of
ideal
skills routing on steroids. This is arnification of skills routing. No intended slur on his previous career, obviously. But then, as time goes by, you can drop those tickets off. So you can say, actually,
next best.
It's important to get this case resolved. The fact that this person it's an email and we wanted it to go to an email specialist, we're going to drop that off as probably the least most important element, and we're going to route this through to somebody who maybe doesn't have that skill, or is a 7 out of 10 on that perspective. So rather than go out of the core SLA, we drop some of that ticket off and we route that call separately. So you're opening up your pool of available skills.
Now this is massive because this answers the two outstanding issues that every single survey for the last 30 years has come up with. I hate queuing, the perceived amount of time, and I hate the fact I'm sent through to somebody who is not knowledgeable. Those are the two top complaints we still have. And what we've just been through is the way that it gets solved.
Right, and it builds in those pre-interaction factors as well, because you can see you're actually routing on all of that pre-interaction stuff. You know that the person's important to your business because they're an important customer. You know they have an open case. You know they're within a renewal cycle. So all this stuff is about pre-interaction. What decisions am I making about this individual based on what we know about them?
Okay, so we've soapboxed about that, and we'll continue. We've talked about it. What I'd love to hear back from our audience today is how much of that is now baked into your capability. And I'm not talking about individual advisors being able to recognize and be nice through human communication. I'm saying it's baked into the infrastructure as an automated capability. Right, so that's that thing. Metrics, let's talk very quickly. It really, at the end of the day, the metrics conversation is all to do with what your primary focus is. Are you still looking to survive your internal perspective, or are you looking to address individual customers on a one-by-one basis? Happily, the research that, again, we're referring to that was done this year shows that some of the long-standing favorites, like average handle time, are not quite as preeminent as they were before, and that things like outside-in metrics, customer sat, first-time resolution, those kinds of things, quality scores, are more preeminent in terms of what's driving our agendas. And I've got to say, that's a big tick in the box, I think, for the industry. The fact
definitely. And differentiation
would like
is...
a copy of that report if they go to callcenterhelper.com and it's on the white papers tab, and you can scroll down. It's called What Contact Centers Are Doing right now, 2015 edition.
Now we don't
download it.
don't have time to dwell on it, but provocatively, look where Net Promoter Score's sitting. Right.
You know more.
And a question to you again. Can you just drop it in, please, to commentary? Are there any other crucial channel-based SLAs that you think matter? Now, I know in social, for example, it's the speed to which you initially respond is hugely important in that environment where people are very antsy, and indeed your behavior is witnessed. So that's a crucial interim SLA. Is there anything else that you've picked up that really helps high performance? The other thing, which we'll move on very, very fast, is some great analysis done again by Jonty on this one, which is showing that in terms of our intent as service organizations, what we're targeting in terms of speed of response. And it very easily visually tells you that we're interested in the good old classic 80-20. Interesting though, some people are nudging it up to 90, which I think is again an encouraging thing. Luckily, looking at it from the customer side, we are still a little bit more patient as UK consumers anyway, and we're willing to wait a little bit longer than that. As far as what are we looking at now? Emails are concerned. Again, I think we've actually got a bit more distribution between 80, 90 and 100% on that particular one.
There's an interesting distinction between email and voice calls there, though, because you really should be looking to do 100% within a certain time period, because an email doesn't hang up.
It's deliberate.
It doesn't go away, in which case you can't answer it. But they're there all the time, so there is no reason why you shouldn't be aiming for 100%.
I think the other challenge is that I think most of our audience are missing a trick on here. That really service level time, I believe, should be 4 hours or under.
Yeah,
totally.
And yet what we're seeing is the actual large one is
24 hours, which is too long.
Which I think will actually just create repeat contact.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we've got one down there, haven't we? Oh, so a little bit. I'm going to move through fairly quickly on this one, but back to the email thing. Great example from I think it's one of your clients actually, as it happens, the SHL folk who do talent management. Now, in their particular case, they accelerated responsiveness from 24 down to 2 hours, and interestingly, because it worked in the context of HR people in front of email screens, it worked for them. They just they needed a response within basically half a day.
Well, it proved to be a better channel, and took away from the voice channel.
More appropriate.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to make the point that email rocks in context. Going backwards, I'm just flipping now in terms of voice. One thing I would like to say from the work that I'm doing with some people on performance and quality is we are, thank goodness, at last beginning to move away from script, beginning now to standardize on guidelines, and indeed some of the interesting things in that is to now rewrite them from the customer's point of view rather than you ought to be. And the most adventurous are even now beginning to empower the consumer, as are the advisors, to really respond in the moment. So as we see voice calls becoming dedicated to the more complex emotional stuff, it's also important that we get the advisors more capable of picking up what matters in the moment. And then the very last thing, which again for debate, because I'm certainly not going to present myself as an expert on this, but anybody in the audience who does lots of chat, there's the picture of what best practice looks like. Is there anything in there that is missed in terms of importance for getting that right? So I'd just like to sort of raise that as an overall question. And then really, I know, very belatedly hand over to Jonty and see if we can just squeeze in 60 seconds of insight from the audience in terms of top tips.
Okay, we're going to just have a very brief look at a couple of top tips from the audience. David27 says, we ask customers to provide brief details of an issue before we start a work chat session. This helps us to know if it's likely to be a complex or a standard.
So filter it, that's clever.
Which I guess ties in, routing it through to the right person, which is quite clever. And a couple of comments back on productivity gains of chat. Eric says, for me, the gain with chat is on our average handling time gain and also first contact resolution, not the amount you can do at the same time. And a very, I think, great comment back from Rob. He says, for us, the number one benefit of web chat is it's what our customers want to do.
Yes, exactly.
I think it ties in very nicely. So that's all we've got time for today. If you could just type into the chat room in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about today's webinar? Put that into the chat room now. And you can watch the replay. callsignhelper.com/recorded webinars will be available in about 1 to 2 hours time. Slides are on the website. We're back on Thursday, 12th of November, back here in Basingstoke, where we're looking at how to tune up your contact centre performance. And just like to thank our two speakers, Martin Hill-Wilson, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Tim Pickard, thank you very much.
Thank you, John T.
And thank you to everyone in the audience.
Yes.
We're going to be we've got a live chat on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks' time, we're taking a little bit of a break with Call Center Expo next week. So thanks, everyone, and look forward to seeing you online in the next couple of weeks. Bye-bye.